Vera Kowalski had $63 in her account and 11 days until the power company's final notice became a disconnection. Not a warning, not a reminder. The final notice. The one with the red border and the bolded number at the bottom that didn't leave room for interpretation. She was 51 years old, running a small alterations shop out of the front room of her house on Dunmore Street in Sudbury, Ontario. A narrow two-story with a porch that leaned slightly to the left and a radiator that knocked 3 times every morning at 5 before it decided whether or not it felt like working. Her daughter Simone was 19 and studying nursing in Thunder Bay. She called on Sundays. She asked if things were okay. Vera always said yes, because Simone had enough on her plate and because saying the truth out loud had a way of making it heavier than it already was. The shop had been slow since October. It was now the 3rd week of November. People spent money on Halloween costumes and then remembered they needed it for Christmas and stopped bringing in their trousers to be hemmed. There was a dry patch every year, and Vera had learned to manage it, to stretch, to eat oatmeal 4 mornings in a row without complaint. But this year the furnace had needed a part in September. Then the car had needed brakes. Then a pipe under the kitchen sink had let go quietly over 2 weeks before she noticed the water damage in the cabinet below. 3 things in 3 months, the way bad luck doesn't come one at a time, but waits until you've already started to tip and then leans on you. She was sitting at the sewing machine at 8:30 at night when someone knocked on the front door. She didn't get customers at that hour. She wasn't expecting anyone. Simone always texted before she called, never showed up. Vera set down the seam ripper and went to the door. An old woman stood on the porch, small, maybe 5 feet, wearing a wool coat that had been good once, the kind of coat that tells you something about who a person used to be. She had a canvas tote bag over one arm and she was holding a button, just one button. Dark green, 4-hole, the size of a thumb. She said, "I'm sorry to bother you at this hour. I saw your sign. I have a coat that's missing a button and I cannot for the life of me find the right match. I've been to 3 places." Vera looked at the button. Then she looked at the woman. The porch light caught the lines around her eyes, the careful way she was standing, the particular posture of someone who does not ask for things easily. Vera said, "Come in. Let me see what I have." The woman's name was Agnes Tremblay-Reid. She said it the way people say a name that has 2 parts to it, because it belongs to 2 different parts of a life. She came inside and stood near the door, while Vera went to the drawer, where she kept spare buttons sorted by size and color in the repurposed sections of an old advent calendar. She found a match in under a minute. Not identical, but close. Same green, same size, slightly different texture on the back where no one would see it. Agnes looked at it for a long moment. She said, "That'll do perfectly." Vera said the charge was $2 for the button, and she'd sew it on in 5 minutes if Agnes wanted to wait. Agnes sat in the chair by the window, the one Vera kept there for customers, and folded her hands in her lap. While Vera sewed, Agnes looked around the shop, the bolts of fabric stacked against the wall, the dressmaker's dummy in the corner wearing a half-finished bridesmaid's dress, the framed photo on the shelf, Vera and Simone at Ramsey Lake. Simone, maybe 12, both of them squinting into the sun. Agnes said, "Is that your daughter?" Vera said yes without looking up from the coat. Agnes said, "She has your eyes." Vera finished the button. She handed the coat back. Agnes put it on, checked the button, buttoned and unbuttoned it twice to be sure. She said, "How much do I owe you?" Vera said, $2 for the button. The labor is nothing. It was 5 minutes. Agnes opened her purse. She paid. She thanked Vera twice, which was once more than the situation required. She went to the door, stopped with her hand on the frame, and said without turning around, "You do good work, the kind that lasts." Then she left. Vera went back to the seam ripper and the trousers and didn't think about it again for a long time. The power stayed on. She picked up 2 alterations jobs that week and a last-minute bridesmaid situation that paid $300 because the maid of honor had lost 20 pounds since the fitting, and the wedding was in 9 days. Vera slept 4 hours a night for a week, and the bill got paid, and December arrived the way it always does in Sudbury, gray first, then white, then the particular cold that settles into the streets and doesn't leave until April. She thought about Agnes once, briefly, when she passed the coat rack and saw the green thread still in the needle from that night. She moved it to the red spool holder and forgot about it again. Christmas came. Simone came home for 10 days. They made tourtière from the recipe that had been Vera's mother's, written on an index card in pencil that had faded to almost nothing, and Vera had memorized it years ago out of fear that one day she wouldn't be able to read it anymore. They watched movies. They drove out to see the lights at Bell Park. Simone asked again if things were okay, and Vera said yes, and this time it was almost true. After Simone left, January settled in. February worse. Then March, the cruelest month in northern Ontario because it looks like spring coming, but isn't. Not yet, not for weeks. The shop was steady. Not good, but steady. Vera paid her bills and put $20 a week into an envelope in the kitchen drawer because her mother had told her that a woman with nothing put aside has nothing to stand on when the floor gives out. She had 43 weeks of envelopes in that drawer. $860. It wasn't enough for much, but it was something. On a Thursday in late March, the phone rang. A number she didn't recognize, area code 705. She almost let it go. She picked up. A man's voice. Professional, measured. He said, "Am I speaking with Vera Kowalski, the alteration shop on Dunmore Street?" She said yes. He said his name was Bertrand Ouellet. He said he was a solicitor with a firm called Ouellet and Marsh in Sudbury. He said he was calling in connection with the estate of Agnes Tremblay-Reid. Vera sat down. She said, "Is she all right?" A pause. The kind of pause that answers the question before the words do. He said, "Mrs. Tremblay-Reid passed away 6 weeks ago. She was 84. She had been in declining health for some time." He said the family had been working through the estate, and there were specific instructions she had left that pertained to Vera directly. He asked if she could come to the office. Vera said yes. She wrote the address on the back of a receipt. She put the phone down and sat at the sewing table without moving for a while. She had spoken to the woman once. A button. 5 minutes on a November night. She did not sleep well that night, or the night after. The office was on Elm Street, 3rd floor of a building that smelled like carpet cleaner and old files. Bertrand Ouellet was 60, slight, with reading glasses he wore on a cord around his neck, and the careful manner of a man who delivers difficult information for a living and has learned not to rush it. He offered her coffee. She took it even though her hands were already unsteady. He set a folder on the table between them. He said, "Mrs. Tremblay-Reid retained our firm 8 months before her passing. She was thorough. She had very specific ideas about what she wanted done with what she had and who she wanted to have it." Vera said, "I sewed a button on her coat." He said, "I know." She said, "I charged her $2. He said, "She mentioned that as well." Something moved across his expression that might have been the beginning of a smile. He opened the folder. He said that Agnes's estate was not large. The house had been sold 2 years prior to cover the costs of assisted living. There was no car, no investment portfolio. What remained had been distributed among her son in Timmins and a church in the Flour Mill neighborhood where she had volunteered for 11 years. But there was one item that sat outside the main distribution. He turned a page toward Vera. He said, "She left you her sewing equipment." Vera looked at the page. He said, "Not just a machine, her full workroom. She was a seamstress for 41 years, professional. She worked out of her home in New Sudbury from 1974 until she retired in 2015. The equipment is inventoried in the attachment." He turned another page. A Juki DDL 8700 purchased in 2008 and maintained regularly. A serger. A cutting table, 8 feet. 2 dress forms, adjustable. Approximately $400 in notions, thread, and hardware. A light box. Vera looked at the list. She looked up. He said, "The estimated replacement value is between $4,000 and $5,000. The room was very quiet. Vera said, "She didn't know me." He said, "She knew enough." He closed the folder. He said, "There is a letter." She asked that I read it to you in person. He reached into a second folder and removed a single sheet of paper, cream-colored, written in a hand that was careful and slightly effortful, the writing of someone whose hands had begun to resist them. He read, "Vera, you don't know me and I don't know you, not really. But I know what I saw when I walked into your shop. I saw a woman working at 8:30 on a November night with good thread and a clean machine and no one to hand things to. I know that kind of working. I did it for 40 years. My husband said I was too serious about it. I told him the work was serious and I was only being honest with it. I don't have children who sew. My son is a good man, but he has no patience for anything that doesn't move faster than he does. The equipment would sit in a garage until someone sold it for a quarter of its value at an estate sale. That seemed like a waste of good tools. Good tools want to be used. I watched you with that coat for 5 minutes and I knew your hands. You'll know what to do with what I'm leaving you. Use it well, that's all I ask. Agnes. Bertrand Ouellet folded the letter. He placed it on the table in front of Vera. Vera looked at it. She said, "Can I have a minute?" He said yes. He stood and left the room quietly and closed the door behind him. Vera sat in the room with the letter and the list and the sound of the building around her, the radiator, the traffic on Elm Street, someone's phone ringing 2 offices down. She put her hands flat on the table. She looked at the ceiling. She thought about her own machines, a Singer she'd bought secondhand in 2009 that needed to be coaxed into reverse and skipped stitches on anything heavier than cotton twill. She had been nursing it along for 3 years. She had been telling herself it had another year in it. She had been telling herself that about a lot of things. She thought about Agnes standing in the doorway, buttoning and unbuttoning the coat, the way she'd said, "You do good work." Not as a pleasantry, as an observation. The way a person with 40 years of experience states a fact, she had been seen by someone who knew what they were looking at. That was the thing she couldn't quite hold on to. That a woman she had spoken to for 5 minutes had looked at her hands and made a decision. When Bertrand Ouellet came back, she said yes to everything. The equipment arrived on a Saturday in a rented trailer that Agnes's son Gilbert drove down from New Sudbury himself. He was 56, broad, with his mother's careful way of holding himself. He shook Vera's hand at the door and they carried things in together for 2 hours without saying much. When they were done, he sat at her kitchen table and had a coffee. He said, "She talked about you." Vera said, "We only met once." He said, "I know. She mentioned that." He looked at his cup. She said she'd been in 3 shops that day and nobody looked up from what they were doing when she came in. You stopped what you were working on. She said that shouldn't be remarkable, but it was. Vera didn't say anything, he said. She was happy the last few months. After she made the decision about the equipment, she stopped worrying about it. She said it was going somewhere it would be used. He stood. He shook her hand again at the door. He said, "She would have liked to see what you do with it." He drove away. Vera stood on the leaning porch and watched the trailer go down Dunmore Street until it turned at the corner and was gone. Then she went inside. The cutting table was against the wall where the old shelving unit used to be. The Juki sat on the workbench, black and solid, nothing like the Singer. She plugged it in. She threaded it from the spool she had on hand. She ran a seam on a scrap of denim. It was quiet, no skipping, no coaxing. It just sewed. She sat there for a moment with the denim in her hands, the clean seam running straight and even from one end to the other. She thought about something her mother used to say when Vera was a girl growing up in Kapuskasing, in a house with 4 kids and 1 income, and the specific mathematics of a family that never quite had enough. Her mother would say, "You don't receive grace to keep it. You receive it to pass it forward. The moment you close your hands around it, it's already gone." Vera had not thought about that sentence in years. It arrived now, standing in the workroom, like something that had been waiting in a back drawer and knew it was time. She called Simone that Sunday. Not to tell her about the equipment, not yet. She called because she wanted to hear her daughter's voice. They talked for an hour. Simone was tired. She was on rotation now, 12-hour shifts at the hospital, learning things about the human body that she came home and needed to talk about and then needed to forget. She said, "Mom, there was a man in the ward today, 80 years old, came in alone. His emergency contact listed is a neighbor, not a family member, a neighbor." Vera said, "Was he all right?" Simone said, "He's fine. I keep thinking about it. A whole life and your emergency contact is a neighbor." Vera said, "A good neighbor is not nothing." Simone was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "No, I know. I just mean I don't want that to be someone we know." Vera looked at the letter on the kitchen table. She had brought it home in her coat pocket and set it there and not moved it. She said, "Me neither, baby." After she hung up, she poured a glass of water and sat at the table and read the letter again. She had read it 5 times now. Each time the part that stayed with her was different. Tonight it was the last line. Good tools want to be used. It wasn't about the machine. She knew that. Agnes had known it too. She started staying open an extra hour in the evenings. Not every night, Tuesdays and Thursdays. She changed the sign in the window. She had handwritten it years ago on a piece of Bristol board, and it had yellowed at the edges. She made a new one, clean, clear, hours listed. A line at the bottom that said walk-ins welcome. The first person who came in on a Tuesday evening was a young man, maybe 25, holding a graduation gown that had split along the shoulder seam. He was defending his thesis on Friday and hadn't noticed until that morning. Vera fixed it in 20 minutes. She charged him $12. He looked like he might cry with relief. She told him good luck on Friday. He asked if she meant it. She said she always meant it when she said it. The second person was an older woman whose husband had died in January. And she was having his dress shirts taken in to fit her because she wanted to wear them around the house and didn't know what to do with her hands when she wasn't doing something that had something to do with him. That one took longer. Not the sewing. The sewing was straightforward. But Vera sat with her for a while after, with coffee, because some people come in for a button and need the 5 minutes, and some people come in for a shirt and need something else entirely, and part of doing good work was knowing the difference. She didn't charge her for the sitting. On a Wednesday morning in May, Vera got a second call from Bertrand Ouellet's office. She thought it was a follow-up on some paperwork. She almost didn't answer. His assistant said he had one more item from the Tremblay-Reid estate to pass along. A small oversight, something that had been in the bottom of a locked box and only recently inventoried. She went back to the office on Elm Street. Same carpet cleaner smell. Same coffee offered. Same folder on the table. But this time the folder held a photograph and a second letter. The letter was shorter, the handwriting more effortful, written later. She thought. The letters larger, the spaces between them less certain. He read it. "I forgot to mention the box. I am leaving it to you as well because what is inside belongs to the kind of person who would know what to do with it. I am not that person's family, but I think you might be closer to it than anyone I know. Open it when you're ready. Agnes." The box was small. Metal, dark green, the color of the button. Vera opened it at the table. Inside, a photograph and 3 envelopes. The photograph was of 2 women in a garden. Tomatoes on stakes, a wooden fence behind them. One woman was younger, apron, laughing at something the camera hadn't caught. The other was older, seated, holding a coffee cup in both hands. Bertrand Ouellet said, "I don't know who they are. There were no names on the back." Vera turned the photograph over. Nothing. She opened the first envelope. Inside, a note in handwriting that was not Agnes's, smaller, slanted, written on the back of what looked like a grocery receipt. It said, "For the woman in the yellow house on Dunmore. She does not know it yet, but she has been seen. ATR. Vera put it down. She opened the second envelope. Inside, a folded clipping from what looked like a community newsletter from 1987. It was about a sewing collective that had operated out of a church basement on Notre Dame Avenue. The article named 4 women who had founded it. Agnes Tremblay, before the Reid, was one of them. The collective had provided free alterations and clothing repairs to anyone who came through the door, no questions, no charge, for 11 years before the church needed the space back. 11 years, free, every Saturday morning. Vera sat with that for a moment. The third envelope held something she wasn't expecting. A small card, handwritten, with an address in Kapuskasing, and a name. A woman named Odette Bergeron Wick. Below the name, in brackets, Agnes had written, "She taught me to sew. She is 87 and still at it. She would like to know you exist." Vera looked at the name, Kapuskasing, where she had grown up. She turned the card over, nothing else on it. Bertrand Willet said, "There may be a connection there that I'm not aware of. Agnes didn't explain it in any document we have." Vera said, "She didn't explain much in writing." He said, "No, she didn't." Vera drove to Kapuskasing on a Saturday in June. 4 hours up the 144, the highway that runs north through the spruce and the rock until the towns get smaller and further apart, and the sky gets bigger, and you remember that this is what the country actually looks like when you're not in the middle of it. The address was a small bungalow on a street she had walked down 100 times as a child. She had not recognized the street name because people in Kapuskasing do not call streets by their names. They call them by landmarks. The street past the arena, the one behind the old Zellers. This was the one behind the park with the broken swing. She had walked past this house as a girl. She was certain of it. She knocked. The woman who came to the door was small, white-haired, 90, if anything, but upright. She had the same particular posture as Agnes, the posture of someone who had spent decades doing precise work and whose body had organized itself around that precision. She said, "You must be Vera." Not a question. She had been expecting her. She held the door open. Vera went inside. The front room was a workroom, bolts of fabric. A machine she recognized as even older than her singer had been. A dressmaker's dummy in the corner with a child's coat pinned on it, half finished. Odette said, "Agnes called me. Not recently, 6 months ago, before she got too tired to use the phone. She said a woman had come into her shop and she knew immediately. She said the same thing I had said to her 40 years before." Vera said, "What did she say?" Odette sat down in the chair by the window. She looked at the coat on the dummy for a moment. Then she said, "She has good hands and she doesn't know it yet." Vera sat in the chair across from her. The room smelled like beeswax and old wood. Outside, the park, the swing was still broken. Some things in Kapuskasing moved slowly. She said, "Did you know my mother?" Odette looked at her. She said, "I knew your grandmother." Vera was quiet. Odette said, "Heloise." She sewed her own children's clothes until she couldn't see well enough. "She came to me in 1968. She didn't want lessons," she said. "She just wanted to talk to someone who understood the frustration of ease that wouldn't lie flat. We talked for 3 hours. She came back every other week for 9 years. Vera said, "I didn't know that." Odette said, "You weren't supposed to." She never talked about herself when she came. She talked about the work. They sat together for 2 hours. Odette made tea. She showed Vera a technique for setting a sleeve that Vera had been doing wrong for years. Not badly, but not quite right, the way things are sometimes when you taught yourself and had no one to show you the better way. Vera's hands caught it immediately, the small correction, the way the fabric settled. Odette watched. She said, "Yes, there it is." When Vera got up to leave, Odette pressed something into her hand, a small spool of thread. Very fine, dark green, the kind Vera couldn't source locally. She said, "Agnes gave that to me in 1983. I kept it because it was too good to use on ordinary things. I think now it belongs on something ordinary. That's usually where the best things end up." Vera drove home. She stopped at the lookout above the river, south of Chapleau, because the light was the kind of light that comes at 7 in June in northern Ontario, low and golden and long, and she needed to stand in it for a minute. She thought about a thread that ran from Odette to her grandmother to Agnes to herself, without anyone in that chain announcing it, without ceremony, without any of them knowing quite where it was going. Just a thread passing hand to hand over 50 years because the work was good and the hands were willing. She thought about Agnes walking into 3 shops on a November evening and only stopping in one. She thought about what it meant to be seen by someone who knew what they were looking at. She got back in the car. She drove home. When she got to Dunmore Street, the porch light was on. She had started leaving it on in the evenings, the way her mother had, for no particular reason except that a lit porch meant someone was home, and home meant someone was there. She unlocked the door. She went inside. She threaded the dark green thread onto the juki. She sat down at the machine. She had a coat waiting. A man's wool overcoat, navy, brought in by a retired teacher who had lost weight after his wife passed and wanted to keep wearing the coat because she had given it to him. A reset of the shoulders, a taking in at the back seam, 2 buttonholes that needed reinforcing. It was 11 o'clock at night. She turned on the lamp. She picked up the coat. She began. There are approximately 235,000 Canadians over the age of 65 living alone in conditions that qualify as social isolation. Many of them have no emergency contact who shares their last name. Many of them have skills and histories and whole lives of knowledge that disappear when they do. Not because no one wanted them, but because no one thought to ask. What Agnes Tremblay-Reid did was not complicated. She walked into a shop. She watched a woman work for 5 minutes. She made a decision. She did not do it to be remembered. She did not do it to be thanked. She did it because she had good tools and she knew where they belonged. That is not a story about luck. That is a story about paying attention. It costs nothing to pay attention. It costs nothing to stop what you are doing when someone comes through the door. It costs nothing to say you do good work when you mean it. What it gives back is not always immediate. Sometimes it takes months. Sometimes it takes 20 years. Sometimes it travels through people who will never meet each other, passes from hand to hand like a spool of very fine thread, and lands somewhere no one expected. But it lands. If this story stayed with you, share it with someone who might need it today. New stories every week on Lena Tale. We'll see you in the next one.